Why did they laugh when she didn't fight back? Why did the quiet girl in the mud not shout, not curse, not even flinch when the world turned cruel? The morning air at Fort Davidson was thin and sharp, heavy with diesel, rain, and the smell of churned-up dirt. Recruits lined the training yard, their breath fogging in the cold light, their nerves raw from weeks of shouting, running, and breaking. Every day was meant to test them, and every day someone broke. But not her. That butterfly's gonna get crushed in a real war, sweetheart. The words cut through the morning like a blade, smug, careless, meant to humiliate. Blake Harrison, self-proclaimed alpha of Bravo Platoon, stood over her with a grin that showed more teeth than humor. Around him, a circle of recruits watched, some laughing, some pretending not to. Pack mentality. They could smell weakness or thought they could. Casey Brennan lay half-buried in mud, her shoulder aching from the shove that had sent her down. Her uniform was soaked, streaked with brown. The sleeve of her shirt had torn, just enough to expose the ink across her collarbone, the thing Blake had been waiting for. A butterfly. Delicate black wings spread wide, the pattern glinting faintly even through the grime. To them it was softness, decoration, the kind of thing that didn't belong in the blood and iron of boot camp. To her, it was something else entirely. Casey pushed herself up with unhurried precision. No scrambling, no panic. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful. She brushed the worst of the dirt from her knees, straightened, and met Blake's stare. Her eyes didn't burn with anger. They didn't show fear either. They held something colder, quieter, the kind of calm that comes from a place no training manual can teach. "You done?" she asked. Her voice was soft. So soft the wind nearly stole it. Blake's grin faltered for half a second, then came back sharper. "Done, princess, I'm just getting started." He leaned closer, voice dripping mockery. "That little decoration," he pointed to her collarbone, "might look cute where you came from, but here it's a target. Here it means you don't belong." Laughter rippled through the watching recruits, the kind that didn't come from amusement, but from fear of not joining in. Casey didn't move. Didn't blink. She let it wash over her like rain. Her fingers brushed the edge of the tattoo, not to hide it but to touch it, tracing the smallest mark near its head. A dot, a scar, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. No one here knew that the butterfly wasn't just ink. It was a memorial. 6 names buried in the design, men and women who died screaming her name during an operation that officially never happened. She looked back at Blake, and for a heartbeat he stepped back. Drill Sergeant Wade Murphy watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. 23 years of breaking down recruits had taught him to spot trouble. Something about Brennan didn't fit the mold. She wasn't the loud type, wasn't the one crying in the dark or begging for a pass home. She just absorbed everything, took hits, took words, took pain, and gave nothing back. That unsettled him more than the toughest Marine wannabe he'd ever seen. When formation broke and the others went a clean gear or joke about Princess Brennan, Casey walked to the far side of the yard, knelt by her locker and cleaned the mud from her hands. Her fingers were calloused, the nails short, precise. Not artist's hands, despite what her file said. Not a civilian transfer with an art background. Hands that had once reassembled an M4 blindfolded under mortar fire. Hands that had once closed the eyes of 6 fallen comrades. She exhaled slowly. 3 days down at Fort Davidson, already too much attention. By mid-afternoon, the tank maintenance bay was alive with sound. Diesel engines roared, hydraulics hissed, and wrenches sang against metal. The scent of oil and steel filled the air, harsh, honest, familiar. For most recruits it was hell. For Casey it was peace. She moved through the belly of an M1A2 Abrams like she'd lived inside it. Every switch, every sound, every vibration beneath her fingers told her something. The others grumbled, swore, complained about grease and torque specs. Casey worked in silence. Drill Sergeant Murphy's shadow fell over her. Brennan. She slid out from beneath the tank, rag in hand, grease smeared across her cheek, uniform spotless except for her hands. Her bearing was straight, her expression calm. Yes, Drill Sergeant. Murphy circled her slowly. You just ran a full diagnostic on that Abrams in 47 minutes. Yes, Drill Sergeant. The manual says it takes 2 hours for a qualified mechanic. I read fast, Drill Sergeant. A few recruits snickered. Blake Harrison's voice came from the back, full of mockery. Yeah, real fast reader, that one. Murphy didn't smile. Reading fast, huh? You also identify hydraulic leaks by sound now. You skipped half the troubleshooting flowchart. Casey met his eyes. She could tell him the truth, that she'd spent 18 months keeping these machines running in conditions that made this climate-controlled bay look like heaven. That she could identify a failing pressure line by pitch alone. That she once fixed a jammed turret drive motor while enemy rounds shredded the sandbags around her. But that would break her cover. Lucky guess, Drill Sergeant. Murphy's jaw worked. He wanted to push, but something in her tone made him stop. Finally, he barked, Fine. Let's see how lucky you are when that tank needs to pass combat readiness in 6 hours. You're responsible for it. Every bolt, every system. Any failure, it's on you. Yes, Drill Sergeant. As he walked away, the whispers started. Not laughter now, but something worse. Doubt, suspicion, the kind that sticks. Beginner's luck, Blake muttered. Give her something real, she'll fold. But not everyone agreed. Austin Rodriguez, working on the next bay over, had watched her closely. He'd seen her hands move with absolute precision, no hesitation, no wasted motion. He'd seen how she'd pause to listen to the hum of the tank, the way her head tilted like a musician tuning an instrument. And he'd seen her fingers drift to her collarbone when Murphy questioned her, thumb pressing over the butterfly. That wasn't vanity. That was memory, something private, something painful. 3 days later, the weather broke. Rain hammered the obstacle course, turning dirt to sludge and ropes to rivers. Murphy's voice carried through the storm, sharp as thunder. This course is designed to break you. It finds your weaknesses and grinds them into mud. Half of you won't finish. Casey stood at the start line. Rain rolled down her face, soaked her hair beneath her helmet. The tattoo beneath her shirt burned against her skin, as if alive. Blake stood 3 positions down, still smirking, but his eyes darted nervously at the lightning. Try not to get lost out there, princess, he called. Casey said nothing. The whistle screamed, and the world turned into motion. Mud, rope shouting, the stink of sweat and fear. Recruits slipped, cursed, clawed their way through the storm. Casey moved like the rain obeyed her. Up the ropes, over the walls, through the tunnels, efficient, silent, every motion controlled. She didn't fight the mud, she flowed through it. When others slipped, she adjusted. When visibility dropped, she moved with certainty. Austin, trailing behind, realized something that made his stomach twist. She wasn't learning the course, she knew it. Her routes weren't guesses, they were patterns. He watched her pause at a corner checkpoint, as the sound of distant helicopter rotors cut through the rain. Training noise piped through speakers to simulate combat. But Casey's reaction was instantaneous. She hit the ground, rolled for cover. Weapon hand, though she wasn't carrying one, moved instinctively toward her sidearm position. It lasted 1 second, but Austin saw it. You don't fake that, not in training, not ever. By the final wall, Casey had built an impossible lead. The rain came harder now, visibility nearly zero. She was half a body away from the top when it happened. The rope gave. Snapped. For a heartbeat, she was weightless. Then impact, hard, wet breath punched from her lungs. The crowd gasped, mud flew, someone shouted for a medic. But before anyone could reach her, she moved, rolled, stood, checked her limbs, her ribs, no brakes, no fear, just silence. Blake Harrison appeared at the top of the wall trying to look innocent. "Tough break, princess. Maybe next time don't show off." She looked up at him, eyes calm, cold. Then turned to Murphy. "Drill sergeant, request permission to run the course again." "Again?" he frowned. "Brennan, you just fell 30 feet. You should be in the med." "I'm fine, drill sergeant. I'll run it again." Murphy hesitated. The other recruits fell silent. Even Blake's smirk wavered. Permission granted. Casey ran it again, and this time the storm didn't slow her. She moved like the elements were an extension of her will. No rope this time, no shortcuts, just her and the wall. She scaled the final 30 feet by hand, each movement deliberate, brutal, unstoppable. When she reached the top, she looked down at Blake, her face half shadow, half rain. Lucky guess, right? And for the first time since she'd arrived, no one laughed. When the course was over and the yard emptied, Casey stayed behind. Rain softened to drizzle. Mud cooled to stillness. She stood alone at the base of the wall, breathing steady, eyes closed. The butterfly burned beneath her uniform, not from shame, but memory. 6 names hidden in its wings. 6 soldiers who trusted her to bring them home. They hadn't, because someone had betrayed them. And that someone was still out there. Maybe even here, at Fort Davidson. She had come under a false name, false background, false history, to hunt them. And now she could feel the walls tightening. Too many eyes, too many questions. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one coming for her. Why was everyone staring at her in the maintenance bay the next morning? Because rumors spread faster than truth. And the story of the girl with the butterfly tattoo who ran the obstacle course twice was now gospel at Fort Davidson. The sound of diesel filled the hangar. Steam hissed from exhaust valves. Metal rang against metal as wrenches turned and tempers flared. But above all that noise, whispers carried, sharp, low, deliberate. "That's her. Lucky guess, my ass. She's too calm, too trained." Casey ignored it. She'd grown used to being the subject of whispers. It had been like that since the ambush, since the night her team died and her new life began. The only way to survive undercover was to disappear in plain sight. But now, she'd drawn too much attention. Her hands worked automatically, tightening bolts on the Abrams transmission housing, wiping grease from the seals, scanning for microfractures. Routine movements, mechanical focus. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying every look, every shift of tone from the past 48 hours. Someone here knew more than they were letting on. Someone was testing her. "Brennan." Drill Sergeant Murphy's bark broke her focus. He stood by the open bay door, raincoat dripping, clipboard in hand. His voice carried through the hangar like thunder. Front and center now. Casey dropped her tools, wiped her hands on a rag, and approached. Her boots echoed across the concrete. The room fell quiet, even the engines seemed to hush. Murphy didn't look up from the clipboard. "You know who you remind me of, Brennan," he said, voice calm but dangerous. "A recruit I had 12 years ago, thought she was too good for protocol, could run circles around everyone. You know what happened to her?" "No, drill sergeant." She washed out, because she didn't understand one simple thing: you can't hide who you really are. He looked up. His gaze lingered on her collarbone where, just barely, the outline of the butterfly tattoo showed beneath her uniform. Casey didn't flinch. "Permission to continue diagnostics, drill sergeant." Murphy's eyes narrowed. He held her stare for a moment, then nodded. "Permission granted." But his voice carried something else: curiosity, distrust, maybe even recognition. As she turned away, Blake Harrison muttered under his breath, "Maybe the princess finally met her match." Casey didn't respond, but she heard every word. By midday, her cover was unraveling faster than she could contain it. The instructors had started calling her in for random evaluations. Her quarters had been inspected twice. And that evening, when she returned from physical training, she found her locker open, personal belongings scattered, photos missing. No one saw anything. No one ever did. She sat on her bunk in silence, the barracks empty except for the hum of the overhead light. She reached for the only thing that was still where she'd left it, a folded scrap of paper hidden beneath her mattress. 6 names, written in fading ink. Torres, Kim, Rodriguez, Williams, Chen, Anderson. Her team. Task Force Shadow. 18 months ago, they'd been sent on a covert retrieval mission, Operation Desert Phoenix, classified, off-book, denied by everyone who authorized it. The team was ambushed before extraction. 6 died, 1 survived. Sorry. The butterfly tattoo was inked a week later in a backroom of a medical tent. Each wing held a name. Each vein in its design a path she'd taken to escape. The tiny scar above its head, the mark of the bullet that grazed her collarbone that night. That tattoo wasn't decoration. It was a map, a memorial, a promise. And she wasn't done keeping it. When morning came, the sky was too bright, too clean after days of rain. But inside the briefing room, the air was thick with something else, suspicion. Instructor Logan Price sat behind a metal desk, her personnel file spread open in front of him. Casey could see the yellow highlighted sections from across the room, inconsistencies, questions, red flags. "Sit down, Brennan," he said, without looking up. She obeyed, chair, posture perfect, hands folded on her lap, no nerves, no tells. Price studied the file for a moment longer, then set it down. "You've been here less than 3 weeks," he said. "In that time, you've achieved perfect scores in maintenance, navigation, weapons, and endurance. Records even." He leaned forward. "Do you know how many recruits have ever done that?" "No, sir." "None." Silence filled the room. He leaned back, eyes sharp as glass. "You want to explain that?" Casey met his gaze. "I study hard, sir." "Study hard," he repeated, voice flat. "Right. You study hard, and somehow you know the torque sequence of an Abrams transmission by heart. You identify hydraulic leaks by pitch. You react to helicopter rotors like incoming fire." He paused. "You want to tell me where you learned that, Brennan?" The air in the room tightened. Casey could almost hear the low whir of a distant rotor in her mind. The night of the ambush, the sound that had haunted her dreams ever since. "I'm observant, sir," she said finally. "I pay attention." Price's eyes flicked up, meeting hers, and for the first time she saw something beneath his professionalism, understanding. The faint recognition of a man who'd seen the same look before. Soldiers who have watched friends die tend to carry a particular quiet in their eyes. He leaned back slowly. "You're not what you say you are, Brennan, I can see that. Question is, are you dangerous?" "No, sir." "Everyone says that." Casey said nothing. The less she said, the longer her cover might hold, but it was cracking and she knew it. "Here, what I think," Price said, his tone hardening. "You're running some kind of game. You've got training you shouldn't have. Maybe you're testing something for intel. Maybe you're here for reasons that have nothing to do with serving your country." The words hit harder than she expected, not because they weren't true, but because they were too close. "I'm here to serve, sir," she said quietly, "same as everyone else." Price studied her a moment longer, then stood. "That's not the answer I was looking for." He reached for a form on his desk. "I'm recommending you for immediate discharge pending review, suspicion of fraudulent enlistment, possible security concerns." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Casey didn't move, didn't breathe. Discharge meant failure. It meant the end of her mission, the end of any chance to find the traitor who'd sold out her team. She stood slowly, eyes forward. "Permission to appeal, sir." "You'll have that opportunity at 1400 hours, Price said, already signing. "Commander Sullivan will review it. If you're lucky, you'll be escorted off base by sunset." "Yes, sir." She turned and walked out, her steps even, controlled. But her mind was on fire. 6 hours. That's all she had. 6 hours before everything she'd built, the new identity, the cover, the silence, fell apart. Outside the briefing room, the sun stabbed through the clouds. The light hit her collar just enough to illuminate the faint lines of the butterfly beneath the fabric. It wasn't warmth she felt. It was weight. The barracks were nearly empty when she returned. Only Rodriguez sat on his bunk, cleaning his weapon, earbuds in, pretending not to notice her. When she opened her locker, she found a folded note wedged inside. "You're being watched." No signature, no hint, just those 3 words. She stared at it, her pulse steady but her mind racing. Someone knew what she was, or at least suspected. Someone inside the base was feeding intel to whoever she'd been hunting. And now they were closing in. She looked up, caught a reflection in the mirror over her bunk. Blake Harrison, outside, leaning against the doorframe, watching her with that same smug smile. "Big day tomorrow, princess," he said. "Word is, you're finally getting sent home." She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. "Guess we'll see." His smile faltered. He hadn't expected her calm, he wanted fear, and she wouldn't give it to him. When he left, she sat back down, pulled the laces on her boots tight and began to plan. If she couldn't maintain cover, she'd have to adapt. Get what she needed before she was cut loose. 3 names on her internal list were still unchecked: Price, Murphy, and an admin officer named Walsh. Any one of them could have ties to the same network that had leaked her team's coordinates in the desert. 6 hours to find proof. 6 hours before discharge turned into exile. The hum of the base grew outside, vehicles moving, engines starting, evening drills echoing. Somewhere a helicopter passed overhead, its rotors low and heavy. Her body reacted before her mind did. Shoulders tensed, heart rate jumped. Every instinct screamed, "Take cover." She closed her eyes and forced her breathing slow. "Not again," she whispered. "Not this time." At 13:30 hours, Casey stood outside Commander Sullivan's office, pressed uniform immaculate, expression blank. Blake Harrison was already there, flanked by 2 recruits, witnesses. Their faces carried smug victory. Inside, she could hear voices, the sound of papers turning, clipped conversation. Then, send her in. The office was sterile, file cabinets, an American flag, a clock ticking too loudly. Commander Brooks Sullivan looked up from her file, his expression bureaucratic. "Recruit Brennan," he said. "You're here under review for falsified enlistment and security inconsistencies. How do you plead?" Casey opened her mouth to answer, but a sound outside froze her blood. "Rotor blades. Close fast." Her posture shifted automatically, muscles tightening, breath halting. Her eyes scanned the room for exits, her body lowering ever so slightly into defensive readiness. The silence was instant. Sullivan stared at her, eyes narrowing. "Interesting reaction, Brennan. Most people don't go into combat mode when they hear training choppers." But this wasn't training. She knew that sound. Through the window, she saw movement personnel running across the parade ground. Not drills, urgency. Then the helicopter descended, kicking up dust and papers. Special operations markings. Her heartbeat slowed. A name surfaced in her mind like a ghost from another life. Ashworth. And as the door opened, bringing in a tall man in black fatigues with eyes that cut through steel, she realized the game had changed. Who was the man stepping through the doorway? And why did every soldier in the room instinctively straighten when he entered? Colonel Reed Ashworth didn't need to announce himself. His presence did it for him. He carried himself like someone who'd spent his life giving orders in places where mistakes cost blood. His boots were wet from the rain, but his uniform looked untouched, pressed with surgical precision. "Commander Sullivan," he said calmly, "I need a moment of your time." Sullivan rose immediately, caught between surprise and protocol. "Of course, Colonel. We were just conducting a discharge hearing for one of our recruits. Ashworth's eyes swept the room, slow, calculating. They landed on Casey and stayed there. Something flickered behind his stare. Not recognition of her face exactly, something deeper, like the faint echo of a memory trying to surface. Casey's pulse slowed. Her instincts screamed danger, not the kind that came from gunfire or explosions, but the kind that came from exposure, recognition. She forced herself to breathe evenly. A second too long, he'd seen it. Ashworth nodded to Sullivan. "Go on, Commander. I didn't mean to interrupt your administrative matter." Blake Harrison took the moment to step forward, sensing opportunity. "Sir, we were just about to finalize the discharge. Recruit Brennan here has been." Ashworth held up a hand. The motion was small, but it silenced the room. "On what grounds?" he asked quietly. "Suspicion of fraudulent enlistment," Sullivan said quickly, clearing his throat. "Possible security issues. Demonstrated skills inconsistent with her file." Ashworth tilted his head. "Skills?" Blake, eager to impress, jumped in. "Yes, sir. She's shown tactical awareness, mechanical expertise, even combat reflexes far above her level. She reacts like she's been in combat before." Ashworth turned to Casey. "Is that true, recruit? You react like you've seen combat before." Her voice was steady. "No, sir." He stepped closer. "Then tell me something." He paused. "What does the butterfly mean?" The air left the room. Blake frowned. "Sir." Ashworth didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Casey. "The tattoo on your left collarbone," he said. "Tell me about it." She froze. How could he know? The uniform hid it completely. Sullivan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Tattoo." Casey didn't answer. The silence stretched thin, fragile as glass. Ashworth's tone softened, but it carried weight. "It's not decoration, is it?" Her throat went dry. "Sir, He interrupted. "Major Casey Brennan." The name hit the room like an explosion. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The hum of the air vent, the ticking clock, even the rain outside. Blake's jaw dropped. Sullivan's pen clattered to the desk. Ashworth continued, voice quiet but absolute. "Task Force Shadow, Operation Desert Phoenix, 6 KIA, 1 survivor." He met her eyes. "Congressional Medal of Honor nomination, withdrawn for classified reasons." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Casey didn't move. She spent 18 months building a wall of lies around her, and in 3 sentences he'd torn it down. Blake stumbled back, color draining from his face. "Yes, sir, that can't be her file." Ashworth's cold laugh cut him off. "Her file? You think you've seen her real file, recruit? Do you know what classification level it takes to read about Task Force Shadow?" He leaned in slightly. "You don't even have clearance to know it existed." Sullivan sank back into his chair, pale. "My God." Ashworth turned his attention back to Casey. "The question isn't who you are, Major. It's what you're doing here." She held his gaze, but inside her chest her heart was hammering. She wanted to remain invisible, anonymous, the quiet mechanic with grease on her hands and no past. But now the lie was ash. "I'm here on assignment," she said finally. "Deep cover." "Whose orders?" "Your command, sir. Counterintelligence Division." Ashworth's brow lifted. "Then you've been operating without my knowledge." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because someone in your chain leaked Operation Desert Phoenix," she said quietly. "And I'm here to find out who." The words landed like a thunderclap. Ashworth's jaw tightened. Sullivan looked lost. Blake looked like he might vomit. For a moment no one spoke. Then softly Ashworth said, "Everyone except Major Brennan out." "Sir, Blake started. "Now," Ashworth snapped. They left quickly, closing the door behind them. Only Ashworth, Casey, and Sullivan remained. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, filled with unspoken understanding. Ashworth set his cap on the table and studied her. 18 months, he said. That's how long you've been off-grid. 18 months since the ambush, Casey replied. 6 dead, 1 survivor. I buried them, sir, and I buried myself with them. Sullivan swallowed hard. Major, if what you're saying is true. It's all true, Ashworth said quietly. I've read the reports. The mission was compromised before they even touched down. Intel leak from within our own command structure. He looked at her. We've been chasing ghosts ever since. Casey nodded once. I stopped chasing ghosts. I came here to hunt them. And you found something. Yes, sir, she hesitated. Patterns, transfers, recruits who washed out under suspicious conditions, officers with sudden promotions. The same network that leaked Desert Phoenix intel has been testing installations for vulnerabilities, using people like me to expose and eliminate undercover operatives. Ashworth exhaled slowly. So that's what this was, the harassment, the sabotage. They were trying to force you out. Yes, sir. It matches reports from 5 other bases. Same tactics, different faces. Sullivan rubbed his temples pale. And we almost discharged you. Ashworth gave him a look that could freeze fire. Almost executed a classified asset on active mission. Then softly to Casey, show me. She hesitated, then unbuttoned the top of her uniform, revealing the black ink against her skin. The butterfly glistened faintly in the fluorescent light, wings etched with perfect symmetry. Ashworth leaned closer. His eyes traced the tiny marks within the design, 6 names, woven into the wings so small they looked like brushstrokes. Beneath them, a date. The day Task Force Shadow died. My God, Sullivan whispered, it's a memorial. Casey's voice was soft but steady. They died trusting me to bring them home. Ashworth straightened. For the first time, something changed in his expression, not command, not analysis, but respect. Deep, wordless respect. Without hesitation, he came to attention, saluted. It wasn't ceremonial. It was reverent, a soldier's salute to another soldier. Sullivan scrambled up and followed suit. Outside, through the glass window, several junior personnel passing by froze mid-step. They couldn't hear what was said, but they saw a full-bird colonel saluting a recruit, and that image traveled through the base like wildfire. Inside, Casey's eyes burned, but her face remained composed. She hadn't been saluted since the day she'd buried 6 caskets. When the moment passed, Ashworth's tone hardened again. Major, your cover's gone. We can't risk you here any longer. She shook her head. I'm not leaving, sir. I'm too close. 3 suspects, all within Fort Davidson's chain of command, Instructor Logan Price, Administrative Officer Jennifer Walsh, and Supply Sergeant Robert Chen, each with access to classified movement data during Desert Phoenix. Ashworth's eyes narrowed. You have proof. Not yet, but I can get it. He studied her, the steadiness, the exhaustion, the quiet fire. You've already given 18 months to this. I'll give the rest of my life if I have to. Sullivan spoke hesitantly. If this conspiracy's as deep as you think. It's deeper, she said, cutting him off. It's coordinated across multiple installations. They're not just leaking intel, they're identifying and eliminating every deep cover operative still active. Ashworth's expression darkened. Then this base is compromised. Yes, sir. He turned to Sullivan. Effective immediately, seal off communications. No outgoing transmissions without clearance. No personnel movements until further notice. And Commander. Yes, Colonel. Not one word of what happened here leaves this room. Not in writing, not in whispers, not in your damn dreams. Sullivan nodded quickly. Ashworth looked back at Casey. You're right, Major. We can't end this quietly anymore. You've uncovered something systemic. You just changed the scope of this operation. What's the next step? She asked. Ashworth exhaled. We name it. He turned toward the whiteboard behind Sullivan's desk and wrote 2 words in black marker. Operation Butterfly Effect. He turned back to her. It started with one butterfly, one survivor, one hidden truth. Now it's going to spread and it's going to shake the entire system. Casey looked down at her collarbone. The tattoo seemed to pulse beneath the light, alive again after 18 months of silence. "Understood, sir," she said quietly. Ashworth nodded once, then extended his hand. "Welcome back to active duty, Major." She took it. The handshake wasn't formal. It was a contract. Outside, the rain had started again, soft, steady, relentless. The kind of rain that doesn't wash things away, but brings them into focus. For the first time since the desert, Casey felt purpose instead of guilt. Not peace, but something close. As she watched Ashworth's helicopter lift off an hour later, rotor wash whipping the parade ground into a storm, she realized something that tightened her chest. The cover was gone. The silence was over. The war, the real one, was about to begin again. And this time, she wasn't fighting for survival. She was fighting for justice. Why did the base suddenly go quiet? Why did conversation stop when she entered the room? Because the truth had leaked, not through reports but through eyes. A colonel had saluted a recruit. And no one knew why. By dawn, Fort Davidson felt different. The same drills, the same echo of boots and shouted commands, but now a hum ran beneath it. A quiet vibration of rumor and uncertainty. Soldiers who once mocked Casey now turned away in silence. Others watched her like a ghost that didn't belong to this world anymore. She walked through it like a shadow, composed, deliberate, detached. Her uniform bore no new insignia, no badge of rank. But she carried authority now, not in title but in presence. Behind her calm, she felt the ground shifting. The revelation had bought her time, not safety. Exposure didn't end the mission, it complicated it. The enemy would adapt. Whoever had infiltrated Fort Davidson knew she was alive, aware, and hunting. And they would come for her, if she didn't get to them first. Colonel Ashworth had left at midnight, returning to headquarters to coordinate Operation Butterfly Effect. Before leaving, he'd handed her a small encrypted comms drive. "Direct channel," he'd said. "Use it only if you're dying or done." The rest was on her. She spent the early hours reassembling her new identity, not as Recruit Brennan, not as the dead Major Brennan, but as something in between. She wasn't pretending anymore. She was exactly what she'd always been, a soldier who'd lost too much and was willing to lose the rest. At 600, she entered the records office under the pretext of verifying personnel files. Administrative Specialist Jennifer Walsh sat behind her desk, neat as a grid line, glasses perched on the tip of her nose, eyes sharp with bureaucratic precision. "Morning," Walsh said without looking up. "Didn't expect to see you in here. I thought you were under investigation." "Situation's been resolved," Casey said evenly. "Commander Sullivan authorized me to assist with internal security review." That got Walsh's attention. Security review. Casey smiled faintly. Routine. She could see Walsh's pulse jump slightly at her neck, just enough to confirm suspicion. Nervousness disguised as professionalism. Casey leaned casually against the filing cabinet. "You handle movement logs, right? Incoming and outgoing shipments, comm transfers, personnel rotation." Walsh hesitated. "That's correct." "And who else has access?" "No one." "Well," she caught herself. "Only Supply Sergeant Chen for requisition verification." Casey nodded slowly. "And Instructor Price." "He occasionally requests files for evaluation reports." There it was, the triangle, Walsh, Chen, Price. The same three names that appeared in her encrypted notes from Desert Phoenix intel leaks. Three overlapping points of access, comms, supply, and personnel. That's how the leak had happened before. The same structure, different location, same playbook. She left the records office with her mind racing. Walsh's reaction had confirmed suspicion, but not guilt. She needed hard proof, transmissions, coded traffic, irregular transfers. And to get that, she needed someone she could trust. At 900, she found Austin Rodriguez by the motor pool, his hands buried in grease, trying to pretend the previous day hadn't happened. He looked up as she approached, the tension clear in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said automatically before catching himself. "Sorry, I mean." "Don't," she interrupted softly. "We don't do titles here, not yet." He nodded awkwardly. "Yes, Ma, Brennan." She studied him for a moment. Honest, steady, the kind of soldier who still believed in right and wrong even when the world around him blurred both. "You saw things others didn't," she said quietly. "The obstacle course, the sabotage." He hesitated. "Yeah, I saw Blake cut your rope." "And I didn't say anything." "Why?" He looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. "Didn't think anyone would believe me. I was just another recruit." He had half the platoon behind him. Casey nodded. "You were right not to speak then, but I need you to now." He frowned. "About Blake?" "About everything. You're observant, you pay attention. I need eyes that don't flinch." He studied her for a long moment. This about what Colonel Ashworth said, the operation. She met his gaze. "It's bigger than this base, but it starts here." Rodriguez wiped his hands on a rag. "What do you need?" "Access to the communication relay in Sector C, the one linked to off-base data lines." His eyes widened. "That's locked down. Only admin clearance can." "Exactly," she said, "which means someone been using it." 2 hours later, they slipped into the communications bay under the cover of maintenance checks. Rodriguez ran interference with the tech on duty. A Corporal too busy calibrating antenna arrays to notice Casey sliding a flash drive into the terminal. Data scrolled across the screen. Transmission logs, packet signatures, routing sequences. Most were routine, but 3 jumped out, encrypted outgoing bursts sent at irregular intervals, masked as weather updates. Destination: unknown IPs outside the military network. Timestamped by Jennifer Walsh. Casey copied the logs, removed the drive, and pocketed it. She turned to Rodriguez. "If anyone asks, this didn't happen." He nodded, nervous but resolute. "Understood." As they left, she caught sight of a reflection in the glass. Someone standing outside the bay doors, watching. Blake Harrison. Their eyes met through the glass for a heartbeat before he turned and walked away. By evening, the tension had thickened. Word spread of sudden reassignments. 2 recruits transferred out, training schedules canceled, whispered speculation about classified reviews. Casey worked quietly in the shadows, piecing together fragments. Walsh's transmissions. Chen's supply manifests, showing discrepancies in fuel shipments that matched off-book helicopter arrivals. And Price's personnel changes, moving certain recruits into key positions without explanation. Together, they formed a pattern, a covert logistics network hidden inside the base's daily routine. And at its center, communication bursts timed to coincide with classified operations at other installations. Desert Phoenix had been one of them. She was getting close, too close. At 2200, a soft knock at her door broke the stillness. She opened it to find Harper Coleman, the recruit who defended her during the hearing. Young, determined, honest eyes. "Ma'am," Harper said, stepping inside quickly, "I need to tell you something." Casey gestured for her to close the door. "What is it?" "I overheard Walsh in the mess hall. She was talking on a secure phone line, said something about Phase 2 starting tonight." She sounded scared. Casey's mind sharpened instantly. "Phase 2 of what?" "I don't know, but she mentioned your name, and Colonel Ashworth." Casey's pulse slowed to a controlled rhythm, the sound of a soldier shifting from planning to execution. "Thank you," she said softly. "You just saved lives." "What should I do?" Harper asked. "Stay visible, stay loud. The safest place for you right now is in plain sight. An hour later, Casey moved through the administrative building like a ghost. The corridors were dark, the air humming faintly from fluorescent lights. She carried no weapon, only the drive and a keycard she'd quietly borrowed from Sullivan's office. Walsh's office door creaked open under her hand. Inside, silence, except for the faint whir of an encrypted terminal. She inserted the drive. The monitor blinked awake. Folders appeared, hundreds of them, coded, layered, disguised as standard requisition archives. One stood out, PHXL02. She opened it and froze. Inside was a complete dossier of Operation Desert Phoenix, her team's mission, classified briefings, coordinates, radio logs, intercepted communications between someone inside the U.S. military and a foreign contractor. The traitor hadn't just leaked intel, they orchestrated it. Her chest tightened. The final outgoing message timestamp, 1 day after the ambush, had been sent from Fort Davidson. She wasn't just chasing ghosts, the betrayer was still active. And then a click behind her. Casey turned slowly. Instructor Logan Price stood in the doorway, half in shadow. His sidearm hung loose at his hip. "Working late, Major," he said softly. Her hand brushed the edge of the desk, near enough to the drive. "Just reviewing records." He stepped closer, expression unreadable. "You know, when you first arrived, I thought you were trouble, too good, too quiet, but I didn't realize how much trouble." Casey's voice was calm. "What do you mean?" "I mean you should have stayed buried." Her eyes flicked to the weapon at his hip, to the subtle shift of his stance, the relaxed readiness of a man who'd drawn a gun before. She exhaled slowly. "You were at Desert Phoenix, weren't you?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was near it. Let's just say I got promoted right after." Casey's pulse steadied. "You leaked it." He smiled. "Leaked? No, facilitated. Some secrets are worth trading when the right people are buying." Her grip tightened. "You sold out 6 soldiers." He shrugged. "They were expendable. You were supposed to be too." Silence. The kind of silence that fills the air before lightning strikes. Casey spoke first, and Walsh. He smiled faintly. "She was the voice, I was the mind. Chen handled logistics. You were the mistake." "And the others?" "Already gone," he said. "Ashworth's pulling his operation tonight, isn't he? Butterfly effect, or whatever he's calling it. You think you're stopping a leak. You're walking into a purge." Her stomach turned cold. "What purge?" Price tilted his head. "The kind that resets everything." Then he reached for his gun. Casey moved first. Years of reflex compressed into a heartbeat, sidestep, strike, disarm. The weapon hit the floor. She swept his legs, pinned him, arm twisted at an impossible angle. His laugh came through clenched teeth. "Too late, Major. You can't stop what's coming." She pressed his arm harder. "Watch me." Then alarms. The base intercom crackled to life. "Security breach detected in Sector D, all personnel." Price smiled through the pain. "They're already here." Casey's blood went cold. Not fear, focus. She slammed the butt of the gun against his temple. He went limp. She grabbed the drive, pocketed it, and ran. Outside, the night had turned violent, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Soldiers shouted, vehicles roared to life. Helicopters overhead, not training this time, real, armed. Fort Davidson was under attack. Not from outside, from within. Casey sprinted toward the command center, comm link open. "This is Major Brennan, authentication code Delta 319. Base compromised. Repeat, internal infiltration." Static, no response, jamming. The butterfly tattoo burned against her collarbone, hot, alive, pulsing with every heartbeat. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to finish what 6 dead soldiers had started. How do you tell friend from enemy when everyone wears the same uniform? That question cut through Casey's mind as she sprinted across the courtyard, boots pounding against wet concrete, alarms blaring overhead. Floodlights sliced through the rain, revealing shadows where soldiers once stood. Fort Davidson, the fortress of order and discipline, had turned into a battlefield. From the armory came the crack of rifles. Somewhere near the hangars, a fuel line ignited, flames climbing into the black sky. The air smelled of burning metal and fear. Casey ducked behind a transport vehicle, heart steady, breath controlled. The adrenaline didn't make her shake anymore. It sharpened her. Every sound, every flicker of movement registered like coordinates on a map. She peeked around the corner, two men moving with deliberate precision toward the command center. Their uniforms were U.S. issue, but their formations weren't. Too smooth, too quiet. Mercenaries embedded inside. She checked the sidearm she'd taken from Price, loaded, one in the chamber. She hadn't fired a weapon since the ambush 18 months ago. She'd sworn she wouldn't again, but promises die fast in chaos. She slipped from cover. Following the pair through the corridor leading to Sector D, the power flickered. Emergency lights pulsing red across the walls. Shadows danced like ghosts. The men stopped at a keypad door. One entered a code far too complex for anyone without high-level clearance. Inside was the comm relay room, the heart of the base. Casey's muscles tensed. If they took control of that relay, every line of communication between Fort Davidson and command would die. The network would go dark, exactly what the conspirators needed to finish the purge. She stepped forward, quiet as breath. One turned, a whisper of movement too late. She dropped him with a single silent strike to the throat, pulling him out of view. The second spun, hand going for his rifle. 2 shots, clean center mass. He fell before he even registered who fired. Casey stood over him, chest rising and falling, gun steady. Her eyes didn't blink. This wasn't triumph, this was necessity. She checked the relay board, already half shut down. Someone had initiated a transfer sequence. Damn it! She started typing commands, aborting the script. Whoever coded it knew exactly what they were doing, rerouting encrypted data to an external satellite channel. Walsh's signature protocol. The same digital footprint as the Desert Phoenix leak. Her mind raced. Walsh had been the voice, Price the handler, Chen the supplier. If the purge was happening now, Chen was coordinating the logistics, weapons, transport, evacuation. And the timing meant only one thing: Ashworth was the target. Outside, the base sirens shifted tone, 3 short bursts followed by one long. Not the standard evacuation signal, a coded alert. It took her half a second to translate it. High-value personnel compromised. Secure command assets. Ashworth. She slammed the comm panel shut, reloaded the sidearm and ran. Rain hit her face as she burst through the exterior doors, sprinting across the open field toward the helipad. The wind from the chopper blades whipped through the air, carrying the scent of kerosene. Colonel Ashworth was there, surrounded by 2 guards, shouting into a radio that wasn't working. Static screamed back. He looked up as she approached. Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by urgency. "Major, they've cut external comms. We're blind." "I know," she said. Price and Walsh coordinated the breach. Chen's moving assets through the motor pool. They're extracting something or someone. Ashworth cursed under his breath. "We need to reach the command bunker." "Already locked down," she said. "They've isolated power. I can override from sublevel 4. He nodded once. "Then move, I'll cover the perimeter." "Sir." "Go, Casey." Her first name. The sound of it hit her harder than the rain. She turned and ran toward the access tunnel, the world erupting behind her. Gunfire, shouting, the rhythmic pulse of chaos. The sublevel corridors were narrow, metallic, echoing. Water dripped from overhead pipes. The emergency lights strobed red, painting the walls in blood. She reached the main control panel, cracked open the casing, and bypassed the manual lock. Her fingers flew, cutting through security like muscle memory. The same systems she'd learned to infiltrate overseas were now the only ones that could save home soil. Then a voice behind her. "Put it down, Major." She froze, slowly turned. Sergeant Robert Chen stood at the far end of the corridor, rifle aimed steady, his face unreadable. "I told them you were too dangerous to keep alive," he said, "but Price wanted proof. Guess I'll deliver it myself." "Why Chen?" she asked quietly. He shrugged. "Money, freedom, call it whatever you want. The world doesn't care about loyalty anymore. I just stopped pretending." "You sold out your own." "They weren't my own. You people die for flags, I live for results." Her eyes narrowed. "You killed them." "I gave them purpose," he said. "Their deaths built something bigger." "Bigger?" she spat. "You built nothing but graves." His finger twitched on the trigger. Casey didn't wait. One motion, drop, roll, shoot. The first bullet hit his shoulder, the second shattered the light above him. Darkness swallowed the hall. In the flicker of red emergency glow, she moved like a ghost, silent, efficient, unstoppable. When the light steadied again, Chen was on the ground, alive barely. She knelt beside him, pressed the barrel to his chest. "Who are you working for?" He coughed blood, smiled through it. "You already know." "Say it." "The same people who created you." Her stomach clenched. "What does that mean?" He laughed, a wet, broken sound. "Project Phoenix wasn't just a mission. It was an experiment. You were the test." She stared, disbelief cutting through the noise. "That's impossible." "You think your team was chosen for skill," he rasped. "They were chosen to fail, to prove how easily loyalty could be rewritten." His voice faded, but the words stuck like splinters. "Welcome to the real war, Major. It's not about nations anymore. It's about control." Then he went still. Casey stood there, heartbeat like thunder. Experiment test. The idea twisted through her mind, impossible and horrifying. If Chen was telling the truth, Desert Phoenix hadn't been a mission gone wrong, it had been engineered, and she'd been its surviving variable. She looked at his lifeless body, then at her reflection in the metal wall, dirt, blood, and that butterfly tattoo peeking from beneath her collar. The butterfly, a symbol of transformation. But what if it had always meant manipulation? She grabbed the comm device from Chen's belt, activated the local channel. Static cleared, faint voices came through. "Sector B compromised. Walsh moving to extraction point. Ashworth pinned near Hangar 3. She took off running. Outside, the rain had turned into a storm. Floodlights cut through sheets of water. Smoke rose from the hangars, mixing with the downpour. The entire base was alive with movement, vehicles overturned, alarms blaring, chaos everywhere. She moved through it like instinct, gun low, scanning every angle. Soldiers scrambled, shouting orders, some firing, others just trying to survive. Near Hangar 3, she spotted them, Ashworth, cornered behind a supply truck, exchanging fire with 3 mercenaries. "Colonel," she shouted. He turned, relief flashing across his face. "Major, they've taken the control tower." A bullet sliced through the air, missing his head by inches. Casey dove behind cover, firing back, each shot deliberate. 2 dropped. The third retreated into the hangar. Ashworth reloaded, breath ragged. "Chen." "Dead," she said. "He was part of it, so was Price. Walsh is next." "Did you get proof?" She nodded. "All of it." "Then we end this now." Together they advanced into the hangar. Inside, a transport helicopter, engines whining, rotors spinning. Walsh stood near the ramp, clutching a tablet, shouting into her headset. "Do it now, burn the drives. No one leaves evidence." Her guards turned, 2 mercenaries with suppressed rifles. Casey moved first, 1 shot, clean. Ashworth covered the other. Walsh froze, eyes wide, breath sharp. You don't understand, Major. You're fighting the wrong war. Then explain it, Casey said, gun leveled, before you lose your chance. Walsh's voice cracked. They'll kill us both if I do. Then make it worth dying for. Walsh hesitated, tears in her eyes. You were never supposed to live. Desert Phoenix wasn't just a leak. It was selection. They wanted survivors, operatives who could disappear. You're part of a new directive. Phoenix wasn't your mission, Casey. You were theirs. Casey's heart pounded. Who are they? Walsh swallowed hard. The directive, a shadow branch under Joint Command. They control every accident, every failure. You were their test subject, and now. A single gunshot cut her off. Walsh's body jerked, blood blooming across her chest. She fell before Casey could reach her. Up on the catwalk, Blake Harrison, rifle in hand, eyes cold. He smirked. Orders are orders, Major. Casey dove behind a crate as he fired again, rounds splintering metal. Ashworth shouted, returning fire. The helicopter roared, still running, blades spinning, wind tearing through the hangar. Casey crawled low, moving between cover, her every sense sharpened to survival. Blake's voice echoed from above. You think you're a hero, huh? You're a product, Casey, a weapon they made. You survived because they wanted to see what it would do to you. Her mind flashed the ambush, the precision, the way she'd been found alive when no one else was. The metal that vanished, the silence that followed. He wasn't lying. Why you? She shouted back. He laughed. Because you were the perfect soldier, obedient, broken, controllable. And now you're the only one who can ruin them. He aimed again, but Ashworth fired first. The impact spun Blake backward off the catwalk. He hit the ground hard, rifle clattering away. Casey rushed over. Blake coughed blood, smirking through the pain. You'll never stop it, he whispered. The directive's already watching. His eyes went still. Outside, the storm finally began to fade. Casey stood in the hangar doorway, soaked, shaking, surrounded by silence. The helicopter's blade slowed to a stop. Ashworth approached beside her. His voice was hoarse. You've done enough for 10 lifetimes. She stared at the horizon. It's not done. You have the proof. We'll expose it. They'll bury it, she said, like they buried everything else. Ashworth looked at her, the weight of years in his eyes. Then what are you going to do? Casey looked down at the butterfly tattoo, rain and blood running across the ink like it was alive. Finish what they started, she said quietly, but this time on my terms. Ashworth nodded. Then God help whoever stands in your way. As dawn broke, smoke still curled from the ruins of Fort Davidson. Soldiers moved among the wreckage, silent, numb. The base that once trained heroes had nearly destroyed them. But somewhere in that silence, something new stirred, not victory, not relief, but purpose. Casey walked away from the hangar without looking back. The world thought the butterfly symbolized rebirth, but sometimes rebirth came through fire. And in that fire, she'd found her reason again. Not revenge, not redemption. Truth. What happens when a soldier realizes the war was never about enemies abroad, but the hands signing the orders at home? 3 days after the siege, Fort Davidson was silent. The fires were out, the debris cleared, but the air still smelled of smoke and betrayal. Helicopters came and went, carrying boxes of classified wreckage and the bodies of those who never made it out. Casey watched from a distance, her posture straight, her eyes hollow. Ashworth had tried to talk to her that morning, but she'd already made up her mind. She wasn't staying for the investigation. Investigations were how truth got buried. She stood by the fence line, wind tugging at her jacket. Beyond the barbed wire, the horizon stretched in gray, endless silence. Somewhere out there were the people who built the directive, the same ones who turned her life into a laboratory experiment. She took one last look at the base, then turned away. Major Casey Brennan no longer existed. Only the ghost they'd created remained. 48 hours later, she was in Washington, D.C., hidden under a civilian ID, staying in a small apartment above an old tailor shop that owed Ashworth a favor. Outside, the world moved as if nothing had changed. People rushed to work, buses honked, sirens blared in the distance. Ordinary life. The kind of life she'd never had and never would. She sat by the window, laptop open, the encrypted drive from Walsh inserted. Thousands of files loaded, comm intercepts, budget allocations, hidden directives buried inside government frameworks. One file stood out, Directive Theta 19 Phoenix Division. She opened it. Inside, pages of coded reports, field experiments, psychological evaluations. The language was clinical, detached. Subject Alpha, Brennan KCL. Phase 3, Cognitive Resilience under Sustained Trauma Conditions. Observation, Exceptional Adaptability, Mission Retention Beyond Predicted Limits. Conclusion, Maintain Surveillance. Potential Prototype for Behavioral Weaponization Protocol. Her hand trembled. She scrolled further. There were others. Subject Beta, Subject Delta, Subject Sigma. All with similar notes, soldiers marked for evaluation, missions designed for failure, each producing a single survivor. It wasn't about testing loyalty, it was about designing it. They weren't just training soldiers, they were programming obedience. And she was the proof of concept. A knock at the door broke the silence. Too slow, one fast, Ashworth's code. She opened it. He entered quietly, trench coat dripping from the rain. His eyes were tired, like a man carrying too many ghosts. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I could say the same," he replied. "They're looking for you. Officially, you're a fugitive." "Unofficially," he sighed. "Unofficially, I'd say you're the only one who still scares them." She nodded at the drive. "You knew." "I suspected," he admitted. "But I didn't want to believe it. We serve our country thinking someone somewhere is still clean. But every war leaves residue, Major. Some stains don't wash off." She looked at him, the lines in his face, the weariness in his eyes. "You said we'd expose it, but if I give you this, it dies in committee. You know that." He didn't argue. "So what's your plan?" "Go where they can't hide behind clearance." Her voice was low, steady. "I'm going to make the world see them." Ashworth studied her, silent. Then softly, "If you do this, they'll hunt you, not with warrants, with ghosts. You'll be erased." "I already was." He nodded, a slow acceptance of something inevitable. "I'll buy you time," he said. "You'll need 48 hours to disappear. After that, you're on your own." He turned to leave, then paused, glancing at her tattoo. "You know, they chose the wrong symbol." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He half smiled. "They thought they made a butterfly that couldn't escape the net, but they forgot one thing." "What?" "Sometimes the net burns first." That night she vanished from Washington. New name, new face, old mission. Her route took her south across Virginia, through backroads and abandoned airstrips, avoiding checkpoints and cameras. She moved like she'd never stopped moving since the ambush. Sleep was a myth, rest a rumor. By the time she reached Georgia, the files had already gone live, uploaded through a decentralized chain Ashworth had set up years ago. Insurance. Within 12 hours, fragments began surfacing on hidden forums, encrypted channels, black site archives. Whispers spread fast: Phoenix Directive, behavioral soldiers, programmed loyalty. The world didn't believe it yet, but truth never starts with belief, it starts with cracks. In a diner off Highway 98, she sat in a corner booth, hoodie up, watching the muted TV behind the counter. A news anchor spoke over grainy footage of Fort Davidson. Unconfirmed reports suggest the explosion was caused by an internal systems breach. Officials deny speculation of sabotage. A cover story, neat, controlled, expected. and exactly what the directive needed. She stirred her coffee, eyes fixed on her reflection in the dark window. For a moment she saw not herself, but all 6 faces she'd lost: Torres, Kim, Rodriguez, Williams, Chen, Anderson. "Wish you were here," she whispered. "You, tell me when I'm going too far." A man slid into the booth across from her. Civilian clothes, military posture. Casey's fingers inched toward the knife beside her plate. He raised a hand. "Easy, I'm not here for that." "Then why are you here?" "I was part of Theta 19, he said quietly. "Subject Sigma." Her breath caught. "You're lying." He shook his head. "No, they pulled me from the Marines 6 years ago, said I failed psych eval. I thought I was being discharged. Turns out I was being rewritten." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "You're not the only survivor." She stared at it. "What's on this?" "Evidence, coordinates. There's a lab in Nevada, hidden under a civilian research contract, Astrodynamics. That's where they built it all." "Built what?" He met her eyes. "The next you." Her chest tightened. "And you came here why?" "Because someone told me if I ever wanted out, to find the woman with the butterfly tattoo." 2 hours later, they were driving west, headlights cutting through the darkness. He introduced himself as Elias Ward. His hands trembled slightly when he talked about the conditioning, the voices, the simulated missions, the hypnotic drills. "It wasn't just training," he said. "They implanted commands, reflex triggers, phrases, sounds. You ever black out during combat?" Casey said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Elias nodded. "Yeah, they used us like machines. Phoenix wasn't about loyalty, it was about control." She stared out the window at the dark highway. "Then were the proof that it failed." He glanced at her, "Or that it worked too well." The road stretched on endlessly. Rain returned, soft, steady, relentless. Somewhere between Georgia and Texas, exhaustion finally caught her. She drifted in and out of dreams, fragments of the ambush, faces shouting, the roar of fire. But this time, another sound crept in. A voice, faint, distant, mechanical. "Alpha, execute." She jolted awake, breath sharp, sweat cold on her skin. Elias gripped the wheel tighter, glancing at her. "Nightmare." She nodded slowly, but the echo of that voice still pulsed behind her eyes. What if the conditioning wasn't gone? What if the directive still had a hold on her mind? By dawn, they reached the outskirts of Nevada. The desert stretched like a pale scar beneath the sky. Sand, wind, silence. They parked near an old pipeline road hidden by dunes. Elias pointed to a ridge on the horizon. Facility, beneath that. Astrodynamics on paper. Black site bunker underneath. Guarded by contractors, not soldiers. Casey loaded her weapon. "Then they'll bleed like contractors too." He gave her a faint smile. "You always talk like this." "Only when I mean it." They moved through the sand, keeping low. The air shimmered with heat. Cameras rotated lazily on towers above. At the base of the ridge, a ventilation shaft stood half buried, old, rusted, forgotten. Elias pried it open. They never expect anyone to come from underneath. They dropped into the darkness. Inside, the air was cold, mechanical. Pipes groaned above, faint hums echoing through the concrete corridors. The deeper they went, the more sterile it became, like descending into the skeleton of something unnatural. They reached a reinforced door marked R&D, Theta Division. Authorized personnel only. Casey swiped a stolen card. The lock disengaged with a hiss. The room beyond was bright, clinical, wrong. Rows of tanks lined the walls, filled with clear fluid and pale mannequins suspended inside. Not mannequins, people. She stepped closer. Monitors flickered with biometric data, neural pathways, brainwave patterns, names. Each tank bore a code name: Beta, Delta, Sigma, Lambda. Her reflection appeared on one of the glass panels, next to a new label still flickering into focus. "Alpha." Her stomach dropped. Inside that tank, her face, eyes closed, breathing. Elias stepped beside her, speechless. That's impossible. Casey's hand trembled as she reached for the glass. No, she whispered, it's not. She looked around, dozens of others, clones, replicas. They hadn't built soldiers, they'd built copies. The directive hadn't been erasing identities, they'd been replacing them. Elias backed away slowly. We have to get out. The overhead speakers crackled. A voice filled the room, calm, confident, familiar. Welcome home, Major Brennan. Her blood froze. She knew that voice. Colonel Ashworth. How do you kill the man who taught you to live with honor? The sound of his voice filled the sterile room, echoing through the speakers like a ghost she thought she could trust. Welcome home, Major Brennan. Casey froze. Elias turned toward her, disbelief written all over his face. That's he's. I know, she said quietly, eyes scanning for cameras. Ashworth. The calm tone returned, amplified by hidden intercoms. I hoped you'd come this far. You were always predictable, Casey, purposeful, even when you ran. She clenched her fists, fighting the wave of betrayal that threatened to drown her. You set me up, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Set you up, the voice chuckled softly. No, I gave you direction. You were lost after Phoenix. I made you useful again. Her chest tightened. Useful. For the directive, Ashworth said simply. For the greater equation. Elias backed toward the exit. This place is wrong, he murmured. We need to leave now. Casey stared at the tank labeled Alpha. The face inside was hers, serene, lifeless, perfect. You were part of it from the start, she said. Of course I was, Ashworth replied. Who do you think built the butterfly program? The idea wasn't to control you, Casey. It was to copy you, to make loyalty reproducible. She felt the words hit her like rounds to the chest. Desert Phoenix, she said. It wasn't just a mission, was it? No, Ashworth answered. It was proof of concept. We needed a soldier who would survive every kind of betrayal, physical, moral, psychological, and still come back standing. You did. You became the variable that wouldn't break, so we made more. Her gaze drifted across the tanks, dozens of faces staring through the glass, waiting to breathe. Her own eyes looked back at her from every direction. Elias swallowed hard. You used her like a lab rat. Ashworth's tone didn't change. Don't mistake sacrifice for cruelty, Sergeant Ward. Without her, this country would never have known how far the human mind could go for duty. Duty, Casey spat. You murdered my team. There was a pause, then. Every experiment requires loss. That was it, the final fracture. The man she once trusted had crossed into something beyond humanity. Casey looked around the room, panels glowing, data streams pulsing with coded patterns. The tanks hummed softly. Elias was scanning the consoles. These systems are all networked, he said. If we overload the coolant regulators, it'll fry the entire lab. She nodded slowly. Do it. Ashworth's voice returned, amused. You won't destroy them, Casey. You're looking at your legacy. You could command an army of your own design, all with your instincts, your memory, your loyalty. She felt something break inside her. You think I want this? You already are this, he said softly. You were never just a soldier, you were architecture. She raised her weapon, aiming at one of the tanks. Then let's start redesigning. The first shot shattered glass. Fluid poured out, flooding the floor. Sparks erupted as the system screamed in protest. The alarm blared, red lights strobing across the white walls. Elias moved fast, typing, rerouting power. I can overload the grid. Give me 60 seconds. Ashworth's voice grew colder. You're wasting what I built. You could have led the future, Casey. Instead, you're burning it. She fired again. Another tank burst, releasing another mirror version of herself into the chaos, faces falling, indistinguishable from her own. The sight tore at her mind. Were these people, or just reflections of what she'd lost? The speaker crackled again. "You won't make it out alive." "Neither will you," she said. Elias hit the final key. The consoles flared. "It's done. The whole lab's going critical." Then gunfire. He staggered, eyes wide, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. Casey spun. Two armed contractors stormed through the corridor, rifles raised. She dropped them both before they could fire again, then dropped to her knees beside Elias. He tried to speak, blood filling his mouth. "You have to finish it." Her voice broke. "Stay with me." He shook his head, weak but calm. "I was made to die for something real. Don't waste it." His hand slipped from hers. For a long moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The room burned around her, lights failing one by one. And through the haze, she heard Ashworth's voice one last time. "You always cared too much, Major. That's what made you perfect. That's what will destroy you." She rose slowly, weapon shaking in her hand. "Maybe," she whispered, "but at least I'll die human." She ran. Corridors collapsed behind her as the coolant systems overloaded. Fire crawled along the ceiling, consuming cables, melting steel. The alarm screamed into distortion. By the time she reached the surface hatch, the desert night was glowing orange. She climbed out, collapsing into the sand as the facility erupted below, a thunderous roar that tore through the earth. Flames shot into the sky like a beacon. The heat seared her face, but she didn't look away. It was over. Or so she thought. A faint hum vibrated through the sand beneath her palms, then another. She turned, saw the outline of a helicopter rising from behind a ridge, lights piercing through the smoke. Ashworth's voice came through a loudspeaker, distant but unmistakable. "You didn't kill the system, Casey. You just released it. They're already awake." Her heart froze. She looked back at the desert movement in the firelight, figures climbing from the wreckage, dozens, maybe more. Each one with her face. For the first time in years, fear gripped her, not for herself, but for what she represented. Ashworth's voice continued, fading into the roar of the rotors. "Every butterfly has to leave the cocoon. Welcome to the swarm." The helicopter disappeared into the clouds. Casey stood there, surrounded by smoke and the sound of crackling fire. She raised her gun, hands trembling, eyes burning. "I am not your weapon," she whispered. The figures in the distance turned, silhouettes mirroring her movements, perfectly synchronized. She lowered her weapon slowly, a realization forming like a knife's edge in her mind. If she destroyed them, the truth would vanish with them. If she didn't, the directive would rise again. No clean choices, no peace, only the narrow path between guilt and purpose. The wind shifted, carrying ash and silence. She turned her back on the wreckage and began to walk. Every step was a vow to hunt the directive to its core, to dismantle what she'd once embodied. Behind her, the horizon burned. Ahead, the world waited, unknowing, unready. Later, when the news broke, the official story called it a research accident. No mention of astrodynamics, no mention of Phoenix division. Just another classified tragedy. But whispers spread of a woman with a tattoo, walking through the ruins like a ghost. Some said she was a deserter. Others said she was a warning. But those who looked closer swore the tattoo on her collarbone had changed. The butterfly's wings now cracked, as if alive, as if it too had survived the fire. That night, she found a mirror in an abandoned outpost near the border. She looked at her reflection, dirt, smoke, blood, and the woman staring back didn't look like her anymore. Not a soldier, not a weapon, something else. "You wanted a prototype," she said softly. "Now you've got one." Outside, a storm gathered over the desert, thunder rolling like the promise of unfinished war. And as the first drops hit the sand, she whispered the vow she'd lived for. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Where do soldiers go when there's no flag left to fight for? What oath remains when every promise has already been broken? For Casey, the answer was simple: you keep moving. Weeks passed since the fire in Nevada. No headlines, no names, just silence. That's how the directive liked it: invisible, untouchable. But ghosts have a way of haunting even the living systems that create them. In the shadows of cities and deserts, fragments of the butterfly program resurfaced: encrypted data leaks, redacted reports, whispers across encrypted networks. Someone was burning the directive from the inside. That someone was her. She crossed 3 borders under false names, living off-grid, sleeping where light didn't reach. Every step left digital noise that she erased before dawn. Every person she trusted disappeared behind layers of code. Her old world, ranks, medals, uniforms, had dissolved into myth. Now she was a phantom soldier with no nation, hunting the machine that had built her. Her reflection in every dark window still startled her sometimes. The butterfly tattoo, now scarred, one wing burned, seemed to move when she breathed, alive with the pulse of everything she'd lost. But she'd learned to live with the ghosts. They spoke to her in quiet moments, reminded her why she couldn't stop. Torres, Kim, Rodriguez, Williams, Chen, Anderson. 6 names etched into her skin, 6 promises she still hadn't broken. In Istanbul, she met her first contact, a hacker who called himself Dove. Skinny, nervous, brilliant, the kind of man who could vanish into digital shadows for months at a time. They met in a crowded cafe under the noise of old jazz and the smell of rain-soaked streets. "You're late," Dove said, not looking up from his laptop. "I'm not late," Casey said quietly, sitting opposite him. "You're just early." He smiled faintly. "Fair, I've been tracking whispers. After Nevada, they went underground. Directive rebranded as Helios Systems. Private defense contractor, government adjacent, publicly clean. But under the surface." He turned the laptop toward her. Lines of code and purchase orders scrolled across the screen. "They're building again." "What?" she asked. "Clones, no, smarter this time. Data ghosts. Cognitive implants modeled after your neural pattern. They called it Project Monarch." Casey exhaled, eyes hardening. "They're using my mind now." He nodded. "They digitized you, Casey, the perfect soldier without a heartbeat." She stared at the screen, rows of her own biometric data mapped into software architecture. Her instincts, her reflexes, her voice patterns, all coded into a machine that never questions orders. "They learned," she said quietly. "They made obedience immortal." Dove leaned closer. "You can stop it. There's one node that controls the network, Helios Black Core, offshore facility. But you won't get near it without authorization keys." Casey's jaw tightened. "Then I'll take them." That night, she broke into a Helios satellite hub outside the city. It wasn't military, it was worse. Private, hidden behind legal walls instead of barbed wire. Security didn't wear flags, they wore suits. She moved through them like smoke. Silent, precise, efficient. Inside the data vault, she found what she needed: biometric access sequences tied to high-level personnel. And one of them froze her blood. Call Reed Ashworth, Executive Director, Helios Systems. He hadn't died in Nevada. He'd become the face of the very machine she was trying to kill. The man who once saluted her now commanded an empire built from her DNA. 2 nights later, she was standing on a rain-soaked pier in the Baltic Sea, facing the faint lights of an offshore platform in the distance. The Helios facility. Waves crashed against the steel pilings, cold and merciless. The air smelled like salt and smoke. Behind her, Dove spoke softly through an earpiece. "Once you're inside, I can keep you invisible for maybe 15 minutes. After that, they'll see you." "15's enough," she said. Casey, he hesitated, voice almost gentle, you don't have to do this alone. I was born alone, she said. They just took longer to admit it. Then she slipped into the dark water, swimming toward the platform as lightning split the horizon. The facility was a fortress of glass and steel, humming with low energy. Inside, servers pulsed like living hearts, walls of data, blinking with synthetic rhythm. Every corridor smelled of ozone and cold perfection. Every echo sounded like memory. She reached the central core. And there, standing before a circular console of light, was Ashworth. Older now, but his posture still carried command, and his voice still carried calm authority. I knew you'd come, he said. Casey aimed her weapon. You should have died in Nevada. I did, he said, almost smiling. At least the part of me that believed in the flag, what's left believes in the future. You call this a future, she asked, building gods out of graves. He stepped closer. You see failure, I see evolution. We've transcended mortality. No more human error, no more disobedience. Imagine a world without chaos, soldiers who never question, never break. Her hand trembled slightly. You mean soldiers who never feel. He studied her, eyes softening. That's your flaw, Casey. You feel too much. You grieve. You doubt. That's why I couldn't replicate you perfectly. You're the last imperfection in the equation. I'll take that as a compliment. It's not, he said. It's extinction. She fired. The bullet hit the console, sparks exploded. The core pulsed violently. Ashworth shouted, you can't destroy it, it's already everywhere. She moved closer, voice steady. Then I'll burn the source. He tried to reach for her gun, but she struck first, elbow to the throat, disarm, one motion. The weapon clattered away. They struggled, surrounded by blinding light. Every screen in the room flickered with fragments of her face, digital ghosts of her own identity staring back. Ashworth's voice rasped as she pinned him against the console. You'll destroy yourself with it. She pressed the emergency override. Maybe that's the point. The system screamed. Overload alarms blared. Power surged through the floor. The facility trembled like a living thing dying. Ashworth's voice broke into static as the circuits burned. You think you're killing me, but you're only freeing me. The explosion drowned his words. She woke hours later on a beach miles from the blast site. Waves lapped against her boots. The sky was gray, the world silent. For a moment she thought she'd died, but the ache in her chest reminded her, no, she was still cursed with being alive. She sat up slowly. The Helios platform was gone, nothing left but smoke and sea. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her mind was clear for the first time in years. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the dog tags she'd carried all this time. 6 names, 6 ghosts. She set them down in the sand, one by one. You can rest now, she whispered. The program over. The wind lifted her hair. The tide began to swallow the tags, carrying them into the ocean. For the first time since the ambush, she let herself cry, not the sharp, angry tears of battle, but the quiet kind that come when you realize you've finally run out of wars to fight. Days turned to weeks. She drifted through quiet towns and empty roads, unseen, unnoticed. The directive was gone. Helios was ash. But the world hadn't changed. There were still wars, still lies, still men building gods out of other people's bones. And she knew, deep down, that the story wasn't about ending something. It was about surviving long enough to remind the next generation what not to become. She stopped in a small border village one evening, near the edge of a wide river. The sun was setting, gold spilling across the water like a final act. A little girl sat by the bank, sketching in the dirt. When she looked up, she smiled shyly. You have a pretty tattoo, she said. Casey smiled back. It's not just pretty, she said softly. It's a reminder. Of what? That even small things can start storms. The girl laughed and went back to drawing. Casey watched her, the innocence, the stillness, and something inside her finally eased. She turned toward the river, pulled out a folded note from her jacket. It was Elias' handwriting, a single line he'd written before the mission. "If you ever make it out, promise me one thing. Don't let them turn you into what you're fighting." She smiled faintly. "I kept my promise." Then she dropped the note into the river, watching it drift away until it vanished beneath the sunset. That night, as darkness fell, she sat beneath the stars. The butterfly tattoo caught the light of the moon, scarred, imperfect, alive. She traced it gently with her fingers, whispering words no one else would ever hear. "For them, for me, for what's left of what's right." She stood, feeling the wind shift, carrying the scent of rain, the same kind of storm that had started it all. She walked toward it, not running from anything anymore, not chasing ghosts, but stepping into whatever came next. And as lightning tore the sky open, the world briefly lit up around her, and in that flash, her shadow stretched wide and free. The wind carried her whisper away, but if someone had been close enough to hear, they might have caught the final truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.